There are many cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! And some of them are more problematic than others. Hello guys, and welcome back to another cold episode. On today's episode, I wanted to talk about what I consider to be problematic cards for the growth of Yu-Gi-Oh! And making a healthy game, or just an interesting game in general. Cards that either automatically win the game, automatically do combos, or just entirely shut down plays, whether they are insane comeback mechanics or just overall playmakers that really hinder the integrity of the duel by allowing less back and forth. These are the cards that I have. Now, this is not an extensive list, it's just some of them. And as you can tell, there's a lot. And that's mostly due to the fact that I do think that Yu-Gi-Oh! As a whole has a lot of issues. Now, I don't think that that's entirely problematic, but I do think that this isn't me asking for a ban list. This is just me pointing out problematic card design more so than actual unfun cards, if that makes sense. So I just want to quickly go through and, first and foremost, this is also in no particular order, and this is not me saying ban all of these cards, I don't like this deck, etc., etc. This is more so pointing out just bad card design, basically, from a myriad of perspectives. So yeah, let's just quickly do the card by card in no particular order. Yeah. Starting off here with hand traps, we have ourselves things like Droll and Lockbird, things like Dimension Shifter, and things like Maxi. Lingering hand traps are bullshit. Let's be honest with ourselves. Anything that lingers, which means that if you can get to an out after it has already resolved, and it's still there, that's really obnoxious, right? So obnoxious that we had to print another card to deal with them called by, which we'll get to in a second. But honestly, yeah, having something just lingering on the field that your opponent can activate from the hand to entirely stop your play, or to at least slow you down heavily, is really obnoxious and very just problematic. If you need cards like this, like for example, Droll and Lockbird is a necessary evil. It is absolutely 100% a necessary evil. It's a card that's good, and you just kind of have to play sometimes. Like right now in the TCG, it is a godsend. Being able to stop Pearly, being able to stop Kashtira, being able to stop a myriad of other searches from a wide variety of different decks. Yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty important. But the fact that it is a necessary card is where the problems arise. Similar things to Maxi, to Shifter, to whatever other lingering effect there might be. For example, I have Dimensional Barrier on here as well. Yeah, lingering effects just aren't exactly a great idea, especially because you can't deal with them. If you have the opportunity to deal with them, but they've already resolved, well crap, you're just out of luck. You don't really get the opportunity to interact unless you have it right then in that moment, which, again, is what I would believe to be problematic card design. Now, if they were on the field, and if they were on the field or something like that, where you could interact with them and still stop them, I think then that is a more interesting card design, which is where something like a one-use card, like, for example, Ash Blossom, or something that is more continuous, like something like Skill Drain, I think is a little bit more fair. And yes, I did just say Skill Drain is more fair, but I mean, when we're looking at cards like Maxi, that's not really saying much now, is it? Moving on. I guess Heroes is next, because it happens to be the next one on the list. Let's talk about some of the problematic hero cards. Now, I don't think that the deck as a whole is problematic, but I do think that the newer cards, and more specifically, 3 fusions and 2 main deck monsters in particular, as well as 1 spell, are just not really great design. First of all, Dark Angel. Who the fuck printed this card? Let's be honest, having the ability to negate spells and traps is nice. Being able to give your opponent a monster that turns off all of their spells at point of resolution, which is insane because it stops things like Super Poly, which is also on this list, is a bit absurd, don't you think? It's something you can't actively deal with if it's on your field, right? Now, granted, you could obviously link it off, you could attack into something, you could do a myriad of things, you were given a monster. But also, it's also entirely shutting you down from activating any spells while it's on your field. So, not exactly great. DPE, not going to go into that one too much. Dark Law is a Macrocosmos that you can special summon with Mask Change. Yeah, both of these cards are absolutely insane, and Absolute Zero is just a powerhouse of a card that for some reason, due to the way that wording works, can blow up your field no matter what. If you touch this card, if it leaves the field in any capacity, it destroys all of your cards. I don't know why this is the case, but alas. Now, I genuinely can't get into all of these, so I'm just gonna quickly go through stuff like this. Drytron, real quick, changes the way that Rituals plays. I don't like the way that it changes the way that Rituals play. It basically makes them into a combo deck that ends on a Ritual Boss Monster. Speaking of Ritual Boss Monsters, this guy is absolute dog shit in terms of card design. Yes, it should have a once per turn. That's it. Just have it. It should have a once per turn. It's really not that hard. It negates a summon. And it's not a once per turn. Wild. Things like a lot of the Naturia cards, like for example Sunflower, which isn't as bad, but because of the things like Camilla and Mole Cricket, I think becomes worse. Naturia, Beast, and Barkion are absolute bullshit. Things like Ava to just infinitely generate additional advantage. Floodgates, like Pachycephalo, that just entirely prevents you from special summoning, or entirely turn off your effects like Inspector Border and a Mono Watto or a Denko Sekka, are just not fun to play against. Necroworld Banshee, I do need to talk about specifically, because Necroworld Banshee, you banish it at quick effect, which means as soon as it hits the field, you basically can't interact with it, and they get a free zombie world. And since you can't ash it because of the way that it specifically places the card onto the field, it becomes very annoying and very difficult to deal with. Now, I know a lot of people actually talk about ash as also being a problem, but here's the thing. Ash isn't nearly a necessary evil, it's just a good point of interaction that you can utilize on your opponent's turn. It's rarely game-ending unless you're playing a really bad deck, in which case, hey, if you die to Ash Blossom, I don't necessarily think that that's Ash Blossom's fault, right? I genuinely don't. I feel like that's more so the deck, or the hand, or whatever build you end up playing, right? It's not necessarily this card's fault. This card is also not a game-ending card. It's not something like Droll and Lockbird, where it can just end your turn. It's also not something that most decks even realistically have a problem with. Some decks don't even play into Ash Blossom in any point, right? And some of them just don't really have a good option to Ash Blossom. Like, for example, Sword Soul. Sometimes it does, sometimes it can end the turn, but most of the time it doesn't, right? So Ash Blossom, I think, is overall fine. Yes, you could argue that it's problematic just because of the fact that it's a hand trap, but I actually like hand traps, so there's that, and I do think it's a cool design. I mean, Magic has this with instants. As long as you have the mana, you can play the instant, so, like, that's wild. All of the tier fusions are absolutely the worst card design I've seen for fusion monsters. I get that you kind of need fusion monsters to be better, but this was not the way to do it. I think it is absolutely necessary to have some sort of spell requirement. The fact that they don't have a spell requirement and require only to be sent to the graveyard is insane. Just period. I think that that's just not good to design. Minus the actual, like, card effects, which, mind you, I love tier. Tier is a great deck. It's one of my favorite decks of all time because of the way that it specifically plays, but let's be honest, you broke fusions. They've done this before with Zodiacs, they've done this before with I was gonna say with Rituals, but not really. Necros didn't really break that. What was the other one? With Pendulums, and they did it again with fusions, and it's really frustrating. They kind of broke it as well with Synchros, with Sword Soul, but less so. And next up, combo pieces like Martha and Circular for just infinite combo, or like just do your full combo with a singular card. That's really dumb. Don't like those kinds of cards. All of the Ishizu cards are just insanely stupid. Scythe, obviously. Kairyu-Shin is a particularly problematic floodgate as opposed to something like Teekboo or Rivalry or Gozen, because one, it's a monster, which means its floodgate effect applies as soon as it hits the field, which means if you only have the ability, you have to have the ability to negate a summon, which there aren't many things that do that in order to stop this guy. And that means as soon as he hits the field, your board is wiped. Unless you are playing a water deck, which not everyone is, which is where the problem arises. I think that this is just a very, very poorly designed card, and since he can be normal summoned due to the effects of other Umi cards, which is kind of what it's required, to actually utilize, and the fact that its stats are also really high makes it just a dumb, poorly designed card. Mostly the Floodgate effect, but just everything put together. It's really bad. The Bystials went too far with the DD Crow. Here's the thing. Bystials are great. I like Bystials. But they're bad card design, because you already have a card that deals with stuff like this in DD Crow. Now granted, that is a one-of. However, well, I should say, there's only one of them. However, being able to do DD Crow-esque shenanigans while also getting a monster onto your side of the field that does additional stuff is kind of crazy. Saronir sends, Druisworm is removal, Magnamut grabs an additional monster, Baldrake is also a banish sometimes. Like, why? Who printed all of these cards? If they just had that first effect, they'd already be really strong. They'd already be tech options for specific metas, like for example the tier meta, right? But why did they have to have everything else? Kind of insane, really poor design. Speaking of poor design, let's talk about some level 7s. Pankratops and Fenris. Pankratops is just an auto win card if going second against a lot of decks. And yeah, being able to go Pankratops, attack in, deal with one monster, force out a negate or something along those lines with the pop, and then go evenly matched, which, hey, it's also on here, is kind of insane. Now, granted, Pankratops, it doesn't matter nearly as much anymore because of things like Fenrir, who is just better Pankratops. Yeah, every deck can play this. It's a free special summon. It doesn't even require your opponent to have a card, and it is just as good going second as it is going first as just a free material. Also, guess what? You could just normal summon Ash Blossom now and make a 10, which, hey, Baron's also here. We'll talk about that later. Forcing out things like kaijus or super polymerizations in a meta can be problematic because your opponent doesn't get a chance to interact with that, right? That is where I find the problem, not being able to actually do anything about that, right? Which is also where I think that towers are a problem because, hey, you can't do anything about it except for draw a kaiju or attack over it. Do you see the problem, right? When you don't actually get to interact, that makes the game worse. It makes it less fun, makes it less engaging, and when you just kind of have to sit there and be like, oh, well, there goes my field, or, oh, well, can't do anything about that, it's unaffected. It's not really entertaining. It's not fun, it's not engaging, it's not a back and forth, it's just, okay, well, you drew the out, which, again, isn't great. Now, I have a whole bunch of, like, generic draw support on here, like, all of the pots basically are insane, especially Pot of Prosperity. This card's crazy. All of the dangers as well, things like Upstart Goblin, etc. Just draw support. Turns out drawing cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where there isn't a mana cost or something along those lines is kind of good. We have some big boss monsters, UCT. I don't know, this card just in particular reads like a custom card. Just make better Dino cards in general, just like holistically, so that we don't have to print a card like this. Or like, Miscellaneousaurus, UCT, stuff like that are just insanely dumb cards. Eldritch is a removal spell, as well as the best card for Floodgates, almost explicitly, because of the fact that it can remove your own Floodgates, while also being a big monster, while also being continuously brought back, while also being a problem to deal with, while also being etc, etc. He's just insane, kind of a just poor design, because none of his effects activate on the field, and you kind of only need the one guy. Protoss is Protoss. He's a Floodgate. Let's move on. Lunalight's Tiger, as well as some of the other Lunalight cards, as you saw, I kind of ran out of room, so we have some over here, are a bit too strong in the way that they specifically combo. Lunalight Tiger, not a hard once per turn. That's pretty simple. Honest Pendulum Effect, most notably. That's pretty simple. That is a problem. On top of that, a lot of the other Lunalight cards also have similar conditions where it's not a hard once per turn, and I think hard once per turns are just necessary at this point. Big board wipes. Hey, big board wipes. Yeah, look, I like comebacks. I do. I find them very interesting. But it's so much more interesting when you watch an opponent pick apart a board that was specially crafted with their own engine. And not just, Harpy's Feather Duster, oh, I win. That's really not fun, right? It's not like investing. It's just, all right, well, you happened to draw the out, that sucks. Now, granted, this is obviously off of the list because of nostalgia factor and stuff like that, but speaking of other nostalgia cards, yeah, Monster Reborn. Turns out being able to just get rid of your opponent's monster and then immediately steal it is kind of problematic. So, yeah, there's that. Imagine being able to go, alright, I pop your DPE, and now it's mine. Or I pop your Baron, and now it's mine, right? I don't think that this card is overly busted, but, like, it's old school Yu-Gi-Oh! Design. It's not great in terms of card design. It's not problematic. No, it is problematic. I just don't think it's broken. I'm just like, yeah, just a generic Monster Reborn isn't exactly something that should be allowed, if that makes sense. Other such cards, Foolish Burial. Being able to send a monster to the graveyard is a fantastic effect, and the fact that this card is not banned is wild to me. We banned Terraforming in Master Duel, and we didn't ban this one. This one is way more problematic and is used in so much more. This card is a 1-card combo for just about half of the decks in the game right now. So, yeah, a bit wonky on that one. Royal Tribute. This is one of the most poorly designed cards I think I've ever seen in Yu-Gi-Oh! Not because it does anything too... Okay. First of all, it's difficult to use because it requires you to control Necro Valley. On top of that, it does affect both players, but since you're the one activating it, and you can activate this on the first turn, with only having activated one other card, it becomes a bit too easy to just high roll your opponent and rip all of the monsters out of their hand. Now, granted, monsters are the main way to play the game, so getting rid of the entirety of the monsters in your opponent's hand is kind of absurd. I think this is... I don't really think that anyone would argue with this one, but this one's hard to really place exactly what makes it bad, because it's basically everything. From the effect, to the conditions, to the deck that it's specifically used in, to the fact that it requires you also to discard monsters, which could not matter, and stuff like that. Card of Demise is on here for similar draw effects, same with Pot of Desires. Grass, it's just pure advantage. It does require you to actually deck build differently, which I think is a very interesting thing. I actually personally do like the way that Grass works, especially at 1. I think at more copies it becomes problematic and just a bit of a high roll card. But at 1 copy, I think it's interesting, and like, is it worth it to play the 1 copy to get the potential yada yada? But all in all, I do think that this card is just overall a bit of a problematic card design, because it does require basically both you and your opponent to kind of be playing differently and to be deck building differently, and it kind of takes away the nuance from the actual in-game play, which I think is where Yu-Gi-Oh! Tends to shine. Engage is on here for draw cards and the like. I think it's just a bit too generic. Signet Mining is a just generic Cybers support card. Cybers is good enough to where this is a problem. I think similarly, the new illusion cards are going to be a problem as well in their current card design, because they are a bit too generic. If you print more illusion types, all of a sudden those illusion types become very powerful because of these generic cards, and I think Signet Mining was very similar. It was a simple way to get Cybers off of the field, or like into the hand, and like a generic search for an archetype, or for a type that wasn't very, or that was very new and didn't have a whole lot going for it. But now at this point it's a bit too strong. Again, board wipes. Dark Ruler's just a board wipe, basically. Chaos Space is just specifically too good. I don't know. Being able to go and grab a different attribute when it's a Chaos type happens to be very good due to the way that Chaos specifically works. And the fact that it's, like, as generic as it is, while also then allowing you to recycle it, or not recycle it, but cycle back a card in order to kind of, like, refill its advantage is kind of crazy. Moon Mirror Shield is... Why did we need this? Moon Mirror Shield basically says you will always win combat, which is not good for an equip card. And it always replaces itself, if you want it to. It doesn't have to as well. I just don't know why. Why would you ever print a card that says you always win combat if this is equipped? That's just... That defeats the whole purpose of Yu-Gi-Oh, right? Zombie World... Zombie World's weird. Typing is so important in Yu-Gi-Oh! That being able to blanket a type, I feel like is just a little bit too strong. And I think it kind of, again, defeats the purpose of Yu-Gi-Oh!, at least in the modern day. This is also an old school card, so it mattered. The secondary effect mattered a lot more than the primary effect, but nowadays the primary effect, I think it matters a lot more with the changing everything to zombies. Also, changing everything in the graves as well to zombies is a bit too much. If it was just one or the other, I think it would be fine, but like having all of that all tied into the one is just a weirdly annoying and almost too centralizing card for a strategy. Speaking of other ones, Numeron Network, yeah, it turns out being able to just do everything with a singular card is a bit dumb. And Paralino is also on here. Rikikon, as well as Unexplored Winds, have similar effects to Kaijus, where they are tributing for cost, which is not fun. Not being able to interact with a card is not fun. Period. Which means if your opponent is trying to actually get rid of one of your cards, you don't get the option to potentially stop that. Called By is basically on here as a necessary evil, but let's be honest, this card is not well designed, period. This is more just like this individual card happens to be a problem because of its design elements. Target a monster in your opponent's graveyard, non-once per turn, banish, negation, quick effect, etc. It's designed to help you against hand traps, but in reality, it can also just kill combos. It can remove boss monsters that would have come back, like for example DPE, as we mentioned previously, and it's just overall a bit of a poorly designed card. I think you could design a card better, and they did, and it's Crossout Designator, and it's limited to 1. Why? Because of Roach. Look, Crossout Designator is what Called By should be. Period. This is just the better designed Called By. And the fact that Crossout is at 1 is baffling to me. Eradicator is just a board, or a hand wipe, actually. And similarly, a Pointer of the Red Lotus. Knowledge of the hand is so much more wildly important in Yu-Gi-Oh! Than it is in other games because of the fact that the games are so much shorter. And on top of that, you also get to get rid of a card. It's insane. Harpy's Featherstorm says no. Who printed this card? Look, I get that Harpies are good. Or, sorry, Harpies are bad. But this is a problem that has been around for a while in rogue decks, where they would print new support, and they'd just be like, alright, just turn off something from your opponent. It's really annoying. It's not good card to design. It doesn't solve any problems. It just makes it so that occasionally they'll just auto-win a game, which is not really fun. Huh? Board wipe. Red Reboot kind of does similar things in that it just turns off trap decks. Just says, oh, you activated a trap? Cool. Die. And then you're just and then you just can't play the game, and it's really fun. Except it's not. So don't know why this is in here. And then Time Pendulum Graph. This one in particular I don't like because of the way that it specifically interacts, where if you don't destroy 2, you just send a card from the field to the grave. It's just kind of weird. I don't know. I honestly don't know why this one is on here. It's fine, but it's just kind of weird. I felt like I had to put a pendulum card on here, and this was the one I chose. Just odd. Moving on to other extra deck cards. Oh, Celestial as well. Let's real quick talk about Celestial. This card's jank. That's it. Why is it that if you have an empty hand, you get to draw 2? Kind of weird. Let's also talk real quick about the other pots that I didn't put on this list specifically. Pot of Avarice and Pot of Duality, I think, are fine. They're so very specific in the way that they are able to draw cards or like generate advantage that I think that they're overall fine. I know Duality's at 2, but realistically, this card shouldn't be at 2. I think it's one of the more well-designed cards. You are only excavating 3, which is, I think, fine. I think that's still strong, but I think it's fine. You're adding one of those to your hand, and then you're shuffling the rest. It's a hard once per turn, and you're locked out of special summoning. Now, there are decks that can play around that, but in all reality, locking you out of special summoning is enough for a pretty mid effect, all things considered. So, kind of odd that this one is even limited. Moving on to the extra deck, Garura, because of Super Poly, is dumb. We've talked about the Naturias. Chaos Ruler is just an insanely good card. Yeah, it's kind of fun, but it just allows for so many degenerate combos because of the fact that being able to mill 5 cards is pretty good. Hint, hint, Kit Kalos. Which I don't have Kit Kalos on here because I do have the other tier fusions, which I think are more important. Baron de Flor. This is more so generic negates. Any sort of generic negate, like Apollosa, Baron, what's the other one? Borreload Savage, etc., are just dumb. Because now everyone's just going to do that. Oh, your rogue deck can now make Baron? Cool, that's what you're going to do. And it centralizes end boards and strategies, which I don't like. Chaos Angel breaks synchros in that you don't need a tuner monster. Why? Don't like that. Same with Gigantic. Gigantic being able to use a Link 2 monster breaks Xyz. What? Huh? That's not a level. You can't do that. On top of that, it's just a generically good card, which is a bit of a problem. Similarly, Alimbertion, this is kind of weird, but I do think that Alimbertion, this last effect here, is so absurdly dumb. I do not understand why they printed it. If it just had these first 2 effects, I think it'd be a fine card. But this last effect, being able to add any spell trap to your hand, why? Why even have that option on there, right? First of all, yes, it is hard to summon, and that's not, like, the problem. But I'm more so concerned with, why is it that if you are able to get 4 monsters onto your side of the field to go into Alimbertion, you can grab any spell you want, or any trap you want? The point of a lot of spells and traps is the fact that they are specifically difficult to get. So being able to do that by utilizing monsters, which are notoriously easy to summon, at least at this point, and trading those for a spell seems kind of weird and counterintuitive, especially since it's just a generic spell trap. You can grab anything. You could grab a bad card if you want, or you could also grab grass, you could grab Super Poly, you could grab whatever it is. Don't know why this is the case, just absurd, kind of weird. There you go. Dracolubion has been used in a countless number of OTAs, and this card is just kind of weird. It doesn't really, I don't know, being able to specifically summon a Xyz monster from the deck and attach another as material is annoying, and also it's target protected. This one could also be just the Numeron, the other Numeron dragon, I forget its name, 100,000 or whatever it is, because, yeah, it turns out the OTK is annoying. Zeus should not exist. Being able to send cards to the graveyard at quick effect speed multiple times per chain is broken. And it causes issues, right? I'm not going to explain this one. This makes sense. Then we have a whole bunch of generic Link 2s that are a bit problematic. Jasmine is on here because of plants. Electroman is on here because of pendulums. Verte is on here because of fusions. Elf is on here because of 2s. Halqifibrax is banned, etc., etc. Nightmare Phoenix is just generic removal, as well as most of the nightmares. And then we also have Sarah. We're going to talk about this. Sarah is just too much advantage for a very difficult to deal with monster that is a Link 1. And this could also just be any Link 1, like for example Meow Meow Mew, which I also have on here. Link 1s are absolutely insane. They should have basically no effect, because being able to get a monster from the field to the grave for free, basically, is a bit too strong. And I think that most Link 1s are just inherently broken by their very design, by being a Link 1. So Sarah just happens to be on here as well. So there you go. So Morg, why does it have target protection? Why does it give everything target protection? This card would be fine if it didn't have target protection. That's it. Griffin is a weird floodgate that also can add back a spell and trap that you may have already used or specifically sent to the graveyard, and with the power of lots of spells and traps in the current game, why does it do that? Also, being able to prevent cards from, or monsters from being activated unless they are linked is just weird. Don't know. Not good design. Speaking of more not good design, this whole video is not good design. Access Code Talker. Why does every deck have the ability to go into this? Every deck can summon this guy. It is generic. Again, similarly to things like Baron and Zeus, they're just too strong for how generic they are. If they were specific to a specific archetype, it'd be a reason to play the archetype. That's what UCT is. And even that card's absurd and busted. Why are we printing cards like this? It doesn't make sense. It's great for OTKs. Great. I want to play the game. I want to play it for more than one turn. Sometimes I don't want to OTK, okay? It's that simple. Baguska. Why is Baguska Baguska? Because any 2 level 4s now turns into better skill drain? Why does that have to happen? Why would we print a better skill drain on a monster? I get that it's easier to deal with because it is a monster. And also link monsters exist, but like, it's just skill drain. It's just skill drain. Why are we printing skill drains? Magnifica just... It's just, I mean, it's part of Martha, it's part of Exo Sisters. It turned a control deck into, I'm going to sit on a whole bunch of back row for a singular turn and then OTK you. Why do we have stuff like this? Similar problem with Sarah and some of the other cards like Oedipus. Isolde is too much generic support for warriors. That's it. It's just too generic. Gilgamesh is on here because it kind of centralized the strategy of DDD, which I really don't like. Basically, now your goal is summon Gilgamesh and go from there. Which, in the past, it was actually a lot more diverse in its interactions and the way that DDD specifically functioned. And I know current DDD players were like, no, it doesn't. It doesn't change them. And no, it definitely does. The fact that you are also able to freely set pendulum scales is so broken. It's not worth it. And Auroradon, yeah, it turns out being able to summon a tuner from deck, as well as some tokens, even without the link summoning, or even with the link summoning restriction, is still insane. Now, again, not a cohesive list, but real quick, what do I not like, and what do I want to see, not necessarily removed, but like changed in future, is I don't like board wipes. I think that it's just too strong of a mechanic to just entirely wipe your board. Now, granted, if there were restrictions to them, like Lightning Storm is semi-decent because you can't control a face-up card, so you can basically only use it going second, but that's still very strong. And similarly with Evenly Matched, you know, unlike something like a Magic where, you know, that's on like a 6-mana card or something along those lines, this is just, here you go, wipe the board, it's gone now. Don't like that. Don't like lingering effects. I think they're a bit too strong. Don't like things that just don't allow you to interact with them, right? Yeah, floodgates. 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 As well as just overly generic cards that are just too strong. Things like Baron with the free Omni Negate. Things like Elf with the free Reborn, etc. So, stuff like that, where it's just, oh, these are a bit too much advantage that you are gaining by summoning them, right? Like, it's never bad to summon Baron, which is where I kind of have the problem. It's like, oh, but sometimes it should be, right? Sometimes you shouldn't always be summoning a card and be like, yeah, that's a good play, right? So there you go. Those are my thoughts. I know that this is a kind of weird video, but I did really want to talk about a lot of these cards, and more so some of the design problems that I see with these cards, and not necessarily just saying these are bad cards, I want them banned, but more so kind of drawing the connections between what is a problem and what is not, kind of what's too generic, what's not. I should really just take this off, just remove it, get it out of here. It's not problematic. But as for the rest of these, I do think that they have some design elements that are a bit either too strong or too specific or just etc. Most of these are just too strong, and for good reason. Again, not saying that these should all be banned, just saying here are some design ideas that don't really make sense, right? Like free special something. Deerland and Fenrir is so absurd. Anyway, that's going to be it for this episode. I hope that you guys did indeed enjoy it. If you did, I'd like to very much appreciate it, and I would love to know what you guys would, do you guys agree with me? Let me know down below in the comments, and whether or not that you think that these design elements are problematic or not. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and remember to always stay frosty. Bye-bye. Shout out to the Frost Guard, my members. Thank you guys so much for the support. and I hope you enjoy the content.